Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world of ours. Today, I've got Danielle Kopp with me. Good morning, good evening to you, Danielle. How are you?
Hello, I'm so glad to be here and chatting. Really looking forward to our conversation, hopefully filled with meaning and encouragement for all who are watching and listening.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this because I already know what's coming. Those of you who've seen the title might have an idea as well. But before we get into that, I had your lovely PR team reach out to me and say, you need to speak to Danielle. And we did. And I am so glad we connected because of the topic we're getting into today. So before we get into that, though, would you do us the honor and introduce yourself to our audience, please, Danielle? Thank you.
Yes, well, like you said, I'm coming to you from the other side of the world. I live in Florida in the United States, and my primary role, or at least what I wanted to come and share today, is how my personal journey of grief as a widower myself, when my wife Sarah died
Mm.
in 2017, intersected with what I do now professionally, which is financial planning and financial therapy. We'll talk more about that in a minute. For other people who have been widowed, often much younger in life, similar to how I was. So that
Yeah,
is so much entangled in there, and I'm sure we'll unpack it here in a
yeah.
minute.
It's often where when the emotional entanglement comes in that I often feel that lived experience really gives you a different understanding, a different starting point to others who don't really know much about it. And that certainly comes out in the work that you do. I can say that up front. But before we get into that again, would you like to share as much as you like of your story of your first wife and what happened?
Yeah, if we go back several years, I was an officer on active duty in the Air Force, and
Mm.
in that involved a lot of moving around. So I met my wife Sarah at that point in time. We got married, moved away from family. I had to figure out life on our own, which was helpful in hindsight because it helped us bond together as a couple. Uh,
Mm.
we did not know it at the time how precious and short our time was. Do any of us, though? Sometimes I think about that in hindsight. And
Yeah.
I'm thankful that we had that kind of crucible experience of military life before we went through the hard challenges of ultimately what came through her health. So,
Mm.
about 3 years into our marriage, Sarah had gone through several miscarriages, three of them, in fact, that led us down a journey of starting to integrate some medical and holistic things. Ultimately, though, and simultaneously, she started having some pretty serious health issues. It was
Mm.
never one thing, and the medical answers varied. Ultimately, we spent a lot of time traveling halfway across the country, talking to doctors. Her health basically just failed and gave out. So here she is, a
Mm.
healthy young woman in her late 20s who is mostly, homebound, very much bedbound in some
Yeah.
cases. So I had to become her full-time caregiver. This caused a lot of implications for my career journey. Had to throttle back. I went through a personal grief over losing a career at the same
Mm.
time as of watching my spouse kind of just fade away. So
Yeah.
layers of grief that I started to go through on that side.
Can I just say I'm really, really glad that you mention it. Obviously, not that you went through it, but that you mention it because it is something that is not often enough talked about. The accumulated grief, the secondary grief. I want to say what happens with that, and
Yeah.
at what age did you, or how fast into the relationship did you become her carer?
So we got married in 2012, and then by
Mm.
late 2015, early 2016, I was pretty much her full-time caregiver.
Well,
So pretty early on. Again, we
yeah,
were in our late 20s at that point in time.
yeah,
So yeah, it's the secondary losses. We talk about
mm,
primary losses where
yeah,
ultimately a spouse or something like that passed away, but there were so many
yeah,
things that happened before that, which again, hindsight, I was able to prepare me for what was yet to come in some
hmm,
ways. It's a training ground. So if we fast forward into that 2016 timeframe, um, again, her health is just failing. We have incomplete answers. There was never any one like thing, big C cancer. It was just
mm,
lots of little things all coming together. Finally, the precipitating event was in early 2017. Um, we ended up living in hospitals from that point on for pretty much 6, 7 months. We were stationed in Idaho at the time, which is kind of in a more rural area. So we ended up having to like be medically transported down to a much bigger city in Utah. And so that was on its whole layer. Again, we're separated from family. Now, the one
Yeah.
thing that is so important, and I think just finding a community, even though we did not have blood relatives around us, we did have community, both
Yeah.
through our church and then ultimately through my Air Force family. So I'm grateful that those people rallied around us, oftentimes not knowing what to say, sometimes
Yeah.
fumbling and awkward in how they did it, but it was a pretty good encouragement. Finally, at long last, though, Sarah made the decision after being presented with some pretty stark medical options to come home to hospice. So
Hmm.
we did that and spent the last 6, 7 weeks together before she ultimately died. And I held her hand and she took her last breath in August of 2017. So at this point in
Wow.
time, 31, like just I have no idea what to do now. Kind of my whole
Hmm.
life is turned upside down.
Yeah. It is so devastating to hear something like that when, in particular, it seems to always be a lot heavier when there's younger couples. You were actually trying to create a family there, and the outcome was vastly different. And there, as we touched on upon before, there is these secondary losses, the wanting to have a family, the having a career that meant so much to you, and then all of a sudden you change that to becoming a full-time carer for your young wife. How how far away was family from you? I know there's such a bizarre question in that, but I mean, my family lives across the world, like literally halfway across the world, um, on the other side in Austria. I mean, in Sydney, in Australia, they're in Austria. It couldn't be further away unless I lived in New Zealand. But it is really, um, it is such a big factor when you're going through something like that, not having support from immediate family. Um, how did that then eventuate when you had to make arrangements after Sarah passed away?
Well, for that time in hospice, thankfully, we were able to get most of the family there, some of it
Mm,
for briefer times. So, it was
yeah,
maybe it's not a long enough flight as what you faced, but certainly travel arrangements were made. I guess this
mm,
kind of ties in some of the other things about just having a good plan in place, like because Sarah and I had some conversations about what was important to her. And,
yeah,
you know, I mean, what more can you say other than in the last few weeks of someone's life, like put a plan in place, bring the loved ones together, spend the
yeah,
money in that kind of
yeah,
circumstance. So I'm grateful that we were able to do that.
yeah. So how did you go from going through something so personal, so deeply emotional, to now helping people on the other side? Like what was your path? Because you came, I just wanted to say flying in, pardon the pun, from the Air Force, and then
Mm,
going
yeah.
into financial therapy. And let's talk a little bit about why that term financial therapy, because I find that very interesting. I'll let you
Yeah.
explain it though. You definitely have better words for that than I do.
So my career had really decelerated. There wasn't really a path for me to continue on what I had been doing.
Yeah.
And even before Sarah went into hospice, I had already made plans to separate, to leave the military. At the
Hmm.
time, I was thinking I need to do something where I can work from home, set my own
Hmm.
schedule, and continue to be a caregiver. So
Mm.
that kind of, for me, at least opened up a career in financial planning. So I had gone through
Mm.
some specific designations and training to be able to do that. I didn't know what it was going to look like, but
Mm.
so Sarah died in August of 2017. I already had my separation date in February of 2018 already lined up. Obviously, the
From
plan
the Air
changed
Force, you
pretty
mean?
dramatically. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Obviously, the plan changed pretty dramatically after that. So now, okay,
Yeah.
well, what now? Something that Sarah and I had also been talking about doing was, because during our time together in the military, we hadn't had as much opportunity to control our schedule, to go where we want to do what we want to do, visit family and friends. So we'd actually set
Mm.
aside some money to be able to travel a little bit, to take a sabbatical. And
Mm.
so in those last few weeks that Sarah and I had, we talked about plans that we had made, like, and she
Yeah.
encouraged me to find a way to go ahead and do that if I still wanted to, and to go forward in this new career, which is a blessing, is a gift that I received that not everyone does who loses a
Mm.
spouse. To have
Yeah.
some of those hard conversations at the end about what next could look like. So I ultimately
Yeah.
did that. I took some time off. It gave me time and space to just step back. Um, in military theory, there's something Karl von Clausewitz wrote called the fog of war. Back in the 1800s, it was smoke on the battlefield. We sometimes experience that in the fog of grief, in a grief journey, but also something that I see in clients regularly, which is the fog of work. In other words, when you're in the day-to-day grind of a career, especially with other responsibilities, sometimes it's hard to step back and think deeply about what comes next. So again, just another gift in hindsight, being able to step back. That led me to like, well, if I'm going to do this, what can I take away from my personal experience here? Now, it sounds so easy right now. It was not. It was excruciating. Lots of journaling and tears in the night and talking to other people who've been through it. Mostly it came from other people who said, well, Daniel, you've walked this road. You're walking this road, this journey of grief. What if you took what you've now learned personally, right? You said your lived experience and helped other people too. So that was the first light bulb. Oh, I can use my pain or what I've gone through to now go and meet other people. There's sometimes people talk about this idea of fluency of grief. It's almost like a language, an experience, right?
Yeah.
Trying to learn a new language, a new culture, new customs that come along with that. So that was the initial impetus of the idea. Financial therapy came a little bit later. But at first, it was just like, okay, well, if people have questions about money, which is very common, particularly in marital relationships, academic research shows that most couples delegate roles and responsibilities, right? So this couple might be better at taking care of the yard work, right? Or they enjoy it more. And this part of the couple might enjoy the finances more. So inevitably what happens when you lose a spouse, there's all the losses that go with it, like loss of memories and experiences and shared hopes and dreams. But some of that is loss of skill sets, practical skill sets, or institutional knowledge. Why did we have this account invested this way? Well, I don't know. That was his job. That was her job, right? So how do you figure out what's next? And you got a mountain of paperwork to deal with, estate settlement. Everything's hard. So how could I come alongside and make it just a little bit less hard? So that was the initial impetus of the idea.
Yeah, I love that because it is absolutely true. You know, like I don't know any couple where it isn't like that. In our case, I was looking after finances, but the security pocket of those finances was all Rob. He looked after life insurance, car insurance, home and content insurance. That was all his thing because I didn't grow up in Australia. So things run slightly differently here compared to what it was in Austria. So the lack of knowledge around that was an immediate, well, he's looking after that, I'm looking after that. We were very, we worked really well together. We were a very well-oiled machine in our day-to-day living and how we tackled life and household and parenting and all of that. You know, it was really quite easy. And then when that split happens through somebody's death and all of a sudden you are responsible for everything, that's exactly what you said. You know, all of a sudden everything becomes hard. Like, how do I do that? I was very, very lucky that I had a new accountant who I just met 2 months before Rob passed. So it was enough time for her to really wrap her brain around everything where we're at. And she was absolutely heaven sent in that journey. And she worked hand in hand with my lawyer who handled the estate. And it was incredible. I was really well looked after. But what happens to those who don't have that? Where do they even start? Can you run us through the, you know, let's say a fresh widow and I contact you. What happens? What are the first steps? Just so people get a bit of an understanding. What do they need to prepare themselves for, like emotionally and also mentally and paperwork wise? Because that's the biggest question, isn't it?
Yeah. There's so much administration of death.
Yeah. Oh God, yes.
Like you're talking about utilities, properties, all the things that are titled, the legal structure, right? There's a legal framework that's typically, like you said, where a lawyer, an attorney, based on specific rules and customs and things like that, will help with the estate process. For most people, then there's a tax process. So glad you had an accountant on your team to be able to help with that.
Yeah.
And then there's okay, what do we do about income replacement? How do we fund college goals or education if there's children in the picture? How do survivor benefits work for pensions? So the list is long, and like anything in life, it's impossible to do all at once. So for most of the time, we help people think about is triaging into the now, soon, and the later decisions. But this also hints at the idea of, I have had so many clients who are smart, technically proficient, outstanding in their career field, top 1% kind of women, and suddenly they're thrust into this widowhood period.
Yeah.
And things that were easy are now hard. And I guess the idea of how brain fog clouds everything, but also this idea of passage or transition makes everything better. Or excuse me, makes everything worse, not better.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
That's also where I realized, as I started working with people in this, that a technically correct answer is not sufficient sometimes. In other words, you can have the best advice or the best follow-up or the best engagement, the best team, but sometimes that's not enough because we are humans, right? We're not rational machines. We have feelings and we have money stories. And this is really where, for me personally, the financial therapy part started to integrate into it. Because before Sarah died, I was not a very empathetic person, I'll put it that way. But grief changed my brain. It rewired it. Something happened. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't understand the chemical process of it. But suddenly, I could weep at anything. Crappy movie, yep, crying, like engaging with a friend who's suffering. And so I'm like, how is that? And now it started to impact how I felt and thought about money. Changed how I wanted to be more generous, more representative, the limited nature, the time sensitivity of life. And I started working with clients, and I noticed that they were getting stuck on certain areas too. And often it had to do with something in the past. So financial therapy is just a blending of modalities. So we've had mental health professionals, whether that's a therapist or a counselor or a social worker or something like that, who use techniques that are evidence-based. Some of them you may have heard of, things like cognitive behavioral therapy or solution-focused or narrative therapy, like tools and techniques that mental health practitioners have been using for decades. But for the most part, mental health practitioners, certainly my grief counselors, my grief therapists, never talked about money. And then on the financial world, these people talk about spreadsheets and volatility and standard deviation, big mathy words.
It's so true. You would never, unless you bring it into that, a therapist would never mention money. Although that is always when somebody dies, it's always a question. It's always
So
a
how do
topic.
we blend these worlds together? And that's really what financial therapy is. Taking tools and techniques from one world. In my case, I'm approaching it from the financial planning world and using techniques. I'm not trying to be a therapist. I don't diagnose, treat, or prescribe. We don't cross into that line. But it's how do we use these tools? So that's really where it starts at for me.
Yeah. So what are people supposed to prepare or bring to that? Because it's obviously then not just paperwork. It is, is there anywhere where you usually send them up front and go like, watch the videos so you know what to expect, or there's a tick list or an explanation, or do you just have a chat with them and explain it there? What's the process? So for people listening to this to understand, what are they up for? How does it even get started?
Well, most people don't reach out to a financial planner or financial advisor thinking that's what they need, right? So this is where it's, how do you meet people where they're at with an expectation? They come with a specific technical question. What should I do about this type of retirement account? Or I got this life insurance money. What do we do with that, right? And there's an answer to that question, but sometimes that answer, in order to be the right answer for what's important to them, that hopes, fears, and dreams idea is, well, how do we know where you want to go in the future without fully knowing, understanding who you are today? What's important to you? Why is money important? How do we honor your late spouse as a part of this process? What were some of the things that, if they were here or wanted to share a message and approach, how would we incorporate that? How was your money experience as a child growing up? What are the lessons that you learned, often subconsciously, from an experience like that? For some of the research work that I did in my master's at Kansas State University in their financial therapy program, there was related to this idea of money avoidance, which is idea of growing up in childhood that money is bad, that you get money only by acquiring it through
Yeah.
perhaps greedy means, or viewing wealth as something that has a source of, uh, you know, good or bad, if we could use a
Yeah.
terminology like that.
Yeah.
And so when these widows receive a large amount of money or control of the finances, sometimes it can feel overwhelming because they
Hmm.
feel a reaction against the money itself,
Yeah.
even apart from the grief. So disentangling the grief from the feelings about money are two separate processes, even.
100%. I love that. Permission to share a quick story here.
Yes, yes.
In my line of work, and I want to go back actually further before Rob died, my husband, and I was already in the space of self-development, and I had my own coaching practice since 2011. And the main topic I worked with was always mindset, So there was a bit of relationship coaching, there was business coaching involved, but it was always the underlying thing was always mindset. And there was one exercise that we actually did that I found hugely interesting and helpful, and that was if money was a person. And we did this exercise where we
Mm.
had a chair where we said the client, and where we had an empty chair where the client was allowed to have money seated right in front of them.
Okay.
And then we went through this experience of describing in police report detail what that person looked like: male, female, old, young, happy, black and white, colorful, whatever their experience and image of money was like. And mostly was rather black and white and drained, and like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, things like that. That was my image back then. Before I did the work, my image of money was Mr. Burns in black and white, falling apart. So there was, and then we went into all these different perspectives. Outside perspectives, inside childhood stories, all these things, and then changing the image to what you actually want. And then we did the role reversal and have the person sit in the perspective of money and look at themselves. So they imagine them sitting in there, and they came from the perspective of money, the person that has described. And there was this, why don't you want me? Like I'm here in abundance, and you don't want me. I'm going into a lot of detail here, but there was this, because of that learned experience that you just mentioned, money is evil, money doesn't grow on trees, have to work hard for your money, all these belief systems that we so often get handed down from generations, to then go into, well, it's there in abundance. Why are you holding yourself back from receiving it? What are the belief systems? So going through this whole spin of perspectives and beliefs, and then creating what you actually want to see instead, was absolutely amazing experience. The reason why I'm sharing this here for the first time, actually openly in an interview, because I've used this so many times with clients that I work with. Fast forward, when I started working in the space of grief, I started using that particular experience with if grief was a person, because it's the exact same thing. There's this expectation and this belief that we learn from society that grief will stay with you forever, and grief is heavy, and grief is sad, and grief is, all the negatives you can imagine. Um, Yet, what about the hidden gifts in adversity, the beauty in grief, the love in grief, the beautiful, the joy in grief? There are so many beautiful and positive emotions that hardly ever get accepted or created space for in that process of grief. So I started doing this exercise with people that I work with in the grief space. So if grief was a person, can you describe him or her to me? Then we did the exact same thing, bringing everything in that you actually want to see in that process, and what relationship would you like to have. So bringing those two together, I really love that, because you just said that, it's two completely different things. There's money and there's grief, and they're two processes that both have a rather negative upbringing. I almost want to say, they came in
Mhm.
from negative mindset, from scarcity mindset, from lack of mindset, whatever you want to put in there. Mostly, not everyone, but mostly people grow up around that. So now here's Daniel Kopp, and you are, bringing those two parts together. And I think it is so, so important, the work that you do. It's, yeah, I would like to bring this back to you now, Daniel, after, thank you for allowing me to share this. When you think of those two people in your life, money and grief, and you really personify that, you really do bring them into one room together when you sit with the person, with your
Yeah.
client. And then what?
Yeah. It's so interesting hearing you share kind of what you just talked about, that experience. It reminds me of what one of the leading researchers and thinkers here that I follow, Rick Taylor, he's another financial planner, financial therapist, and he talks about this idea of internal family systems, where there's one part of you on one shoulder and one part of you on the other shoulder that's
Yeah,
talking at each other. Like, we
yeah,
see it probably in some of the cartoons, right? You have the little angel character and the little devil
yeah.
character, and which side of you, like, you're being torn in two ways. It's kind of like
Mm.
definition of ambivalence, which is when equally being pulled in two different ways. You think about like wanting to move forward and growth mindset versus where you came from, and sometimes
Yeah,
the unconscious, subconscious limiting beliefs that come from that. So yeah, this
yeah.
idea that grief sits with you, but we also use the analogy of the roller coaster of grief, right? There's ups and downs
Mm.
associated
Oh,
with
yeah,
that. In
absolutely.
a similar way, there's sometimes the roller coaster, the ups and downs of our financial lives. So I love that you reflected and shared a personal story that encouraged me to share a little one here too, which is
Please.
before Sarah died, I was very much um, let me back up. There's four kind of primary money scripts that some researchers have identified. And one of them is called money vigilance. It's the archetype, I always call it like Smaug the dragon from the book The Lord of the Rings, sitting in his caves with his piles of gold, hoarding over them. Right? This idea of more, 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 and trying to look for security in that. In my case, I was trying to plan for something like early financial independence, retirement,
Yeah.
and then boom, my life changed. Sarah's gone. I'm like, what was the point of saving all that? Right now, that I did not suddenly go to the other, which is the
Yeah.
idea of money worship, right? Just spend it all. But at the same time, it helped me realize, I need a more healthy perspective myself, a balance of saving wisely, right? Having some resources for now and in the future, but also living in the moment, appreciating what's here and now. And so that's the tension sometimes in grief, because I've had clients who come to me um, who said, well, I don't want this money. It reminds me of my loss. Let's spend it all. Let's give it away.
Wow.
Some researchers studied some of the 9/11 widows in the US about this
Yes.
afterwards.
Yeah.
And it became a prominent theme of this idea of blood money, just get rid of it, because it reminded them so painfully of their loss rather than treating it separate from their grief. Now, this is
Yeah.
not a clean linear process. There's no
Yeah.
breaking point that separates this. But if you've ever felt like that, or if you've interacted with somebody who felt like that, that's typical. That's to be expected. And working through grief is sometimes a parallel process to working
Yeah.
through a new financial reality as well.
Yeah. Wow. Danielle, thank you so much for sharing what you just did. I would like to round our conversation up with, if you are in this unthinkable situation right now, for those listening in and might have just lost someone or are just going through this process of, where do I even start, with my financial planning, etc. And I understand not all of my listeners are in the US, but what is the one word of advice that, or a few words of advice that you would like to share with them? What can be a very first step to even make sense of or find your direction in terms of financial therapy?
It's a process, it's a journey, right? And
Yeah.
recognize that this is a very small subset, at least within the profession of financial planning, financial therapy. In the United States, the Financial Therapy Association really only came about a little more than 10 years ago. So it's a very new discipline. There's only a few
Yeah.
academic research programs, only a few PhDs. So on the professional side, like if you want, there's the Journal of Financial Therapy is free. It's open source. Anyone can go and read those articles. And if this is your personal lived experience, there's a resource of a web page there on the Financial Therapy Association website where you can find professionals who this is their expertise if you wanted to talk to somebody. But there's not a lot of people who did. All right,
Yeah.
then setting that aside, and on the personal side, again, back to that idea of triaging decisions into now, soon, and later buckets. Some stuff has to get done now, and that's
Yeah.
just the nature of grief and estate administration. But don't put all
Mm.
the pressure on yourself. Be patient with yourself. I feel like that's something I repeat over and over to clients. Like,
Mm.
it can be okay. Some of these decisions can wait until soon, and some of these decisions can wait until later. It's
Yeah.
hard to do that on your own. So hopefully you have a team or friends or family or trusted people who can help you think through that. But yeah, be patient
Yeah.
with yourself. You will get through this.
Thank you so much. It's such a great reminder in general in the space of grief, be patient with yourself. So for those listening, thinking like, what was that? What Can I write this down? We will be sharing all of this in our show notes. So Danielle, I'm going to get you to send me some of the links so we can add that, so we can add these into the show notes so people can just really do their own research or get in touch with you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for sharing your story, and everybody, please check out the show notes in about half an hour because this video is live right now. If you're watching live, if you're watching the replay, you'll be fine. It'll all be there. So, Daniel, thank you for being here, and everybody else for listening. Thank you. If you find this useful, we go live on a weekly basis. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get notified as soon as we are live. Sending you so much love. This is Danielle and Marie signing off.